Okay, this lesson is extremely exciting because this is where I get to introduce to you the concept of an array. This is the third kind of object, the third class of object that we'll be encountering in our lessons. We have already encountered integers and strings. So as you know, I can create an integer using a simple number. In this case, I will assign that integer to a variable called number. And I will have a string. And I can check the class of these types of objects. So we can see that the 10 is an integer and the hello is a string. But now we are going to introduce a completely new class of object. And I'm going to store it to a variable. I'll just call it array since that is what it is going to be. To create an array, we use these square brackets and we put a list of values within there separated by commas. As you can see, I've put integers and strings within this array. So an array is a kind of object, it is a class of object that acts as a list. It happens to be a list of other objects. If we want to check the class of this array, we will see that the class is called array. So an array isn't anything complicated. It is simply a list of individual objects. I'm going to get rid of these other lines of code and focus on the array at hand. As you can see, the 2 is in the first spot, the 10 is in the second spot, the string A is in the third spot, the 12 is in the fourth spot, and the string B is in the fifth spot. These spots, as I call them, the actual official jargon for them is the index. So the 2 is in a particular index. It is in the first index. Now, a weird thing in most programming languages is that the first index of an array is called 0. And the second spot, the second index, is called 1, and so on and so forth. So instead of the first index being 1, which may have been more intuitive to you, it actually begins at 0. So the 2 is at index 0. The 10 is at index 1. The string A is at index 2. The integer 12 is at index 3. And the string B is at index 4. So the index is just a fancy way of referring to the spot within the array that something exists. Now the reason we care so much about the index of an array is that if we wanted to print out, let's say, one of these particular objects within the array, we can do so as follows. So we would refer to the array by calling its name, in this case, the variable name array, followed by square brackets, and then the number of the index at which the thing we want to print out lies. So in this case, if we want to print out the string A, since that exists within index 2, we put the 2 there. When we run the code, we'll see that indeed we get the A printed to the terminal. If we wanted to print whatever is at index 0, we'd see that we get the 2 printed to the terminal. What happens if we try to print something at an index that is not contained within this array? So let's print out array 10. There is nothing at index 10 because this array goes only up to index 4. As you can see, we get nothing. Interestingly enough, if we would change the puts to a p, which prints out a more literal interpretation of things, you can see we get nil. Nil is a kind of Ruby object that represents the concept of nothing. And that makes sense because there is nothing at array index 10. Now we could also just print the entire array in its entirety like this. Again, using the p keyword, it prints out the array in its most literal form. If you were to use the puts keyword, it actually prints it out with each object on its own individual line, sort of a fancy way of printing it out. Let's go back to the p. Now, before printing out this array again, let me show you how we can add something to an array. If we want to add something to an array that's already been established, we can do this. Array, less than sign, less than sign. Some people refer to this as the shovel operator, and we could put in some additional value. In this case, I will add in the string C. So on line 1, we establish the array. On line 2, we add a C to the end of it. and line 3 prints out the array in its entirety in its literal form. As you can see, when we print out the array, the C is located inside the array. In this case, it is at index 5. Now finally, we can also override something at a particular index. So let's say I wanted to change the 12, which is currently at index 3, and I wanted to make it a 7. So I could do this. Array at index 3, I'm going to override it to be a 7. So now, as you can see, when we print out the array to the terminal, the object at index 3 is now a 7 rather than a 12 as it was originally. So these are the fundamentals of an array, what it is, and how to use it.